Hi guys, welcome to the latest podcast of Yarn and Black. Today I've got a really great friend of mine on Seau. I'll introduce you to Seau in a minute, but first I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm coming in from. I'm here in Baldwin Kew on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, but also like to thank any other Aboriginal people that have joined us today, and especially to my guest, Seau. Seau, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, AJ. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. I'm glad that you could join us.
Thank
I just want to acknowledge that we've known each other for a couple of years now, and I know you're really busy, so I'm so glad you've been able to squeeze us in to have a bit of a yarn with us today.
thank you, AJ. I also want to acknowledge the lands of the Wurundjeri people that whose land I'm on today, and very grateful to be here with you, AJ. And also want to have a moment to acknowledge the important work that you're doing ongoing and have done in the past for community and mob. So shout out to you. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks, yeah. So we might as well just start. Look, people may not know who you are. So who are you? Where you're from?
So my name is Seau Geas. I'm an Ankamuthi, Wapabara, Darnley Island and Murray Island woman. I've been living here in Naarm for the last 5 years, and have been working in the community sector space now for the past 5 years, and feel like it's such a privilege to be living on this beautiful country and live, breathe and raise my children here.
So for some people may not know exactly where your language groups are. Give us a bit of a geography location of where they're located.
So Ankamuthi is Northern Peninsula area in Queensland, far north Queensland, right up the top of Queensland. Beautiful country. Wapabara country is Great Keppel Island. So all of my people are saltwater people, and then Darnley Island and Murray Island in the Eastern Island parts of the Torres Straits.
So you grew up there?
I grew up in Cairns.
Grew up in Cairns.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And you went to primary school, high school there?
Yeah, I went to primary school at Parramatta Primary School, which is such a tiny little school, but I felt really grateful because it was such a diverse school. There were so many people that looked like me, going to school, and it was deadly. Like, they taught Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander dancing as an extra curriculum activity that you could do. So you'd have dance practice through the week, and then after school or something you might have dance practice, but you'd also get to do events throughout school and sometimes on weekends, and participate in like the big dance festivals across Queensland. And so I felt really grateful that from a young age it was so normalized. That culture was so normalized. The teachers were always, looking back, most of them were pretty culturally safe, but I think it's because they all had that experience working in community.
So when you transitioned to high school, how much Aboriginal studies or learnings did you learn as a student?
None. Like, I remember jumping out of the the history class window when the teacher tried to talk to me about Captain Cook, finding so-called Australia, and arguing with this teacher. And of course, back in those times when it would be like, okay, class, we're going to be talking about Indigenous studies, you'd get, everyone turn around and look at the Indigenous person like you were the expert. And for the so-called expert in that space, whenever you question the teachers, it was always a really big sensitive issue. And so I recall jumping out of the window one day and going to WAG school, because that was the narrative that was told to us growing up. But I didn't stick around in school for very long. I actually left school at the age of 15.
Yeah. So when you left school, what did you do?
So I left school and I actually left home. So looking back now, I just obviously think it's wild because I have a teenage daughter of my own who's about to turn 16. But it was school holidays. A group of friends decided that we were going to go work on a backpackers farm and go pick some bananas, and school holidays ended and I decided that I was going to stay. So it's quite wild to think back now. You know, the ancestors were definitely looking out for me because, you know, some of the compromising situations I'd found myself in being a kid at 15, staying in backpackers resorts, you know, working on these fruit farms. It was wild to me and it's even more wild to me now having teenage daughters, because the thought of them doing that is absolutely insane, but also very healing in the concept that they're not at that space where they're, you know, feeling that unsafe where they need to leave home. And that was my reasoning. I kind of just didn't feel like I could be at home at that time. You know, I just lost my grandfather and he was everything in our family. And it was just a really rough time. And so that was actually the only way that I could convince my mum to go to the farm, was that my contributions of making money was going to go to my granddad's tombstone opening, which is, we call, you know, an island, as islanders, we sort of refer to the unveiling as a tombstone opening. But I said to my mum that I would, you know, the proceeds of the work that I was going to be doing would go towards the headstone. And of course it didn't. It was just sort of, it was just a sort of ticket and way out. And then
went to the Seau Foundation.
It did. And it, you know, like staying in a backpackers resort at 15, where, you know, it was just, it was, you know, so much fun, so much fun, but also very, very dangerous as a 15-year-old. But it's actually, you know, where I met the father of my kids. And one minute I was in Innisfail, Queensland, and then I think it was like maybe a month later I was in Hay, New South Wales, and my mum had no idea, you know, where that even was. But I guess at the time, you know, like there wasn't really much my mum could do. We didn't really have that, the strong foundation of a relationship for her words to, you know, kind of have any substance to me at that point, unfortunately. So it kind of began, it sort of pivoted me on this journey that I've been on for the last, you know, couple of years. Well, couple, but you know, the last over decade or so. It feels like a couple of years sometimes, but I look back up now and just think, you know, if my daughter's not home at a certain time, like I'm on that phone and, you know, where are you? When are you coming home, kind of thing. So I do want to acknowledge, you know, the terror and how that would have felt for my mum.
So if your daughter said to you, Mum, I'm going banana picking on a farm, what would you say to her now?
I just would ugly laugh in her face. And because my kids are aware of, you know, my story and that they're very mindful of that. And you know, it honestly, it would just be another joke a weekly joke in our family, in our household, because they like to stir me like that.
So after school and after you had some kids, did you go back to study anything?
No. And, you know, I think though, without sounding too, I guess, airy fairy, I feel like my education school-wise, like my schooling stopped at 15, but life taught me so much after that. And so I think, you know, obviously leaving home at such a young age and having to develop, you know, quite quickly and in so many different circumstances, you know, like whether it be from like working or basic taking care of myself. But then, you know, when I did move to Hay, New South Wales, like the father of my kids, who as the father of my kids was significantly older than me at the time. So, you know, being a kid and going into a relationship with, like, as a 15-year-old with a 31-year-old, and then, you know, ultimately ending up in an ongoing relationship with that perpetrated family violence for such a long time, it was quite a lot. And I had children at a young age. Like I fell pregnant with my eldest when I was 17 years old and had him at 18. And it was, so I felt like I was, you know, there were so many things that I had learnt. And education wise though, I didn't have that structural schooling for such a long time, and I haven't gone back.
If you had a chance to go back, what would you have studied, or what would you have liked to have done?
Do you know what? Because I've thought about this, and it's something that I'm toying with now. I kind of really haven't found something that I love so much that I want to adhere myself to. Like during COVID, I bought like these a book of law books, and it was from everything from like torts to social justice, and it was all the different components. And I wanted to, read it to see if I could stick to them. And I think I got through. I think I got through 3 out of 5, and just thought like this is just boring for me. This is so boring for me. But I felt I didn't feel like it aligned with me at the time. So I really don't know, and it's a question that I'm constantly, asking myself.
Now, you moved to Nam about 5 or 6 years ago. What made you move down here to
So
Melbourne?
the it's quite random actually. Like of the town that I'm moved to, Deniliquin is quite a small town. Like it's got 9,000 people. Very conventional country town. Like there's the surrounding mission there is Moonacolour, and I was very grateful that my kids and I were able to establish our solid foundation there, because throughout, I talked about earlier how I'd sort of gone through family violence for a number of years. It was quite ironic ending up back in Deniliquin, because during that time of the family violence, the kids and I, we were kind of in and out of homeless shelters or family violence shelters. And at one point, my children had been taken without my consent. So the kid's dad had kidnapped them and taken them interstate. And during that time, it was about 8 weeks before the kids were returned back to my care. And the process of that was so gut-wrenching and grueling. And it kind of just makes me, it was just a little bit of an insight to what, the true history of this country, of what that's been like for our mobs. That's still happening today. And it was quite, it's just, obviously it's still very raw to me, but I look at how the system was during that time, the fact that it went on, for such a long time, but it also me obtaining custody of my children, that process itself, it took over 5 years, even though the other party was in and out of incarceration during those 5 years. So it was astounding to me that, just the outcome and how long that all played out to be. But to go back to Deniliquin, it's quite ironic that Denny was where I built my solid foundation, because when the children were kidnapped, it's where they were taken to. So to build our solid foundation, it was just there. It was, an opportunity for us to fully heal, because there was a moment where it was kind of like the final instance of the family violence and all the things that had happened during that time. But for the first time, I proceeded with going down the pathway of going down the court. And I kind of never felt, up until that point, there was one police officer in South Australia that I felt like was with me, and my story was believed and it was heard, and they were incredible. But this process in Denny, it was beautiful. Like the police officer that I had been given was incredible, and they went out of their way to make me feel seen and heard, but they would also use their RDOs and swap them around so they could be in court attendance with me. Like, I can't express to you how terrifying it was to, experience family violence for almost, at this point, I think it was like almost 7 years. And to experience it for that long, and to not be believed along the way, when you do speak up and you try and I guess use your voice and it's not heard, is so disheartening. And this police officer was incredible in that sense, where he would, as I said, take days off. But I remember the first time I got on the stand, and in my mind, I was kind of saying, like, see, I'll keep your shit together, because I could see, the perp sort of sitting in the courtroom, and they were super smug and like beanie on, smug, like sort of sitting back, smirking at me. And I remember just kind of staring at the back of the wall. And as soon as I walked out of the courtroom, my knees gave way and I collapsed, and I was like howling, and I was in fetal position. And they laid on the floor, and they just, laid beside me and just cried with me. And it was such a profound healing moment for myself. I think I needed that as well, because as Aboriginal people, and Torres Strait Islander people, often our first exposure to the community services sector isn't through professional choice, it's through our social circumstances. It's through our lived experience. It's through whether, police are called on us because it's a Saturday afternoon and we're having a barbecue and we've got music playing, or we see our uncles being ripped away from us and being locked up, or attending funerals from the ages of 4. And it's so normalized for people to just pass away at an early age, in our communities. And so I think for myself, I needed that healing of, that there are good police officers out there who are willing to serve and protect. And it made me feel so validated in that sense, though, of my story was believed. And, after that, after experiencing that for so long, there are times where you question yourself and how valid your own experience. So it was quite powerful, and I'm still friends with both of the police officers to this day, and they're both still in the force. One's in New South Wales and one's still in Denny, and I got to see the one in Denny not too long ago, and still give them a big hug, and be able to have that heart to heart yarn, knowing that person made such a big impact on my life, but also really propelled me to be where I am today. But also, in so many different ways, it allows me to be the person that I want in community, but also the mum that I want to be and the person I want to be for myself and for my children. And that's been the biggest gift to me, because I think, as a family violence survivor, there's so many parts of that journey where you can lose sight of yourself and you believe those things that you're often told. So, having people in my life that remind me of that worthiness and that love is so important.
What things make you strengthen? What makes you resilient? What things do you do to keep your spirits up and high?
I think that, the working with mob is so special. Like, it's bittersweet though. I wish I didn't, and I'm sure like you, I wish we didn't have to do the work that we have, that we show up and do every day. The end goal is to not be in this space forever. I'd love to just be able to go work in hospitality and just, I'd love to be able to just do something, not any offense to my hospitality mob out there, like, you guys all deserve medals, but I'd love to do something where that mental capacity and that emotional and spiritual burden doesn't weigh so much. Because I don't know about you, some days, like, my soul feels like I have to peel it out of bed, and it's just that a constant sort of cycle I think that we all face as mob of, we're all tired and we're exhausted, and just like our ancestors and the paths that have been created before us, that resiliency is innate in all of us. And I think, as somebody who my sister took her life at 19 years old, due to mental health, and it just, the alternatives of knowing what that's like for us mob, whether it be health determinants or access to mental health treatment, or with incarceration, like, all of these things, we know what the alternative is. And so it just makes me so appreciative grateful to be able to be in this space, you know, and meet people like yourself and, you know, all the incredible other mob that we work alongside who are doing that work for our community. Because it's so important for, you know, that lived experience. And I was really grateful that, like, at one point in my career, when I actually first started working in the community sector space, like, you know how everyone kind of goes around and they speak about your quals and like, yeah. It's everyone kind of went around and they were talking about how they had a master's and a diploma, and it got to me, and it was my first time. I just finished up in hospitality before I had my kid, you know, my last baby, the fourth kid. And it got to me and I was just like, I'm a stay-at-home mum and I've got 4 kids. And I was fighting back the tears because that fear of, like, dogma had set in, but that feeling of not feeling worthy had set in, and I felt like I was out of my depth. You know, it was a communications role at the Healings Foundation. And my boss, Mikey, I'd met them, you know, a couple of years earlier at a Rotary leadership conference, and Mikey's now passed, and he was just such a beautiful blessing to me, though, because he was a Wiradjuri man, and, you know, I said to him, Mikey, I feel like I'm out of my depth and I can't do this role. And he looked at me and he said, Seau, your lived experience is exactly why you're here, and you as a person is why you're here. And that had stayed with me throughout my career. And, you know, when I have been in management positions, it's something that I've enforced and reaffirmed, you know, on the people that I'm working with, is that what Mikey had said to me was that, you know, that piece of paper can come later. Your lived experience means so much, and it has stayed with me, and it's something that's probably grounded me and allowed me to continue to be working, you know, within this space over the last couple of years, and it makes me so grateful for that.
Now, I know that through your experiences with family violence in your own personal life and your kids, you've accessed so many support services have been in your life. The buzzwords that keep going around are things like cultural safety. Have you always felt culturally safe going into services as a client? Or what does cultural safety mean to you?
I can't help but think back to a time being in one of the shelters in Adelaide, and it was an Aboriginal, like an Aboriginal led one, but like they had a non-Indigenous person running a yarning circle, and there was a talking stick, like a rain stick that was being used, but it was labeled as a talking stick. And, you know, like, bless her, and you had to call her auntie as well. She's self-titled auntie, but non-Indigenous lady, and had the bangles, you know, had all the necklaces. And so every time she'd sort of talk, you know, we have to be respectful. And I remember thinking, like, part of me going through this program is you had to participate, you know, within these things that the organisation provides. And from obviously working in that space now, funding point of view, I get it. And, you know, I get it. I remember, though, sitting there looking at this lady thinking, well, lady, what are you on? Like, it was just so inappropriate. It was so inappropriate. And she was trying to talk to us about our feelings and, you know, obviously not having the qualifications, but that lack of cultural safety to begin with, like, there's just the appropriation that was done to start that process was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But then I recall another program, and, you know, that program itself was incredible and it helped me so much. However, I do remember there was another program that we had to participate in, and it taught you how to, like, stretch out your food.
Reconciliation is a big word that gets thrown around. What does reconciliation mean to you?
For me personally, I think it's such a big scope. I I would like to see the systems align with that messaging around what reconciliation means. I think in order to bring in true reconciliation, the environment needs to be supportive of that. It's really hard to kind of make change, lasting change, if the structures don't support that, whether that be from funding, autonomy for organizations, or self-determination. And it's so important that our mob are the ones that are driving these conversations and have a seat at discussing what that looks like.
So, Seau, can you give us an example of where you might have seen reconciliation working really well?
Yeah, thanks, AJ. So my son goes to boarding school, and he is in he's about to start his final year. When I remember dropping him off, and he's year 7. When I drop him off, and it's an Anglican school, and I knew that, and I was aware of it. It's a school that we'd looked at for a couple of years. But the school opened with an opening hymn, and I remember just the shivers, running down my spine. They didn't do an acknowledgement. And I walked away from that initial day, obviously very, it was a big decision for me to send my child to boarding school in general, let alone walking away thinking, how safe is my kid going to be culturally at this school? So I wrote the school an email and just let them know what my reflections were and my thoughts. And to my surprise, the school were incredible. Their first thoughts were, how can we change this? And what do we need to do? And so it was terrific. The advice that I'd given was to reach out and engage with the other Indigenous families, because there was quite a handful at the time, and, have that open discussion of what that looks like. And this school had made such an incredible effort, because not only did they take on, the recommendations, they implemented every single one of them. And what was so powerful to me was, there were so many powerful moments, but at the time I'd been working at the Healing Foundation, and the Healing Foundation had developed school kits from the age of kindergarten. At that point, I think they were only till year 9 or 10. But they developed these school kits that teach the proper history and truth telling for age appropriate, classes, of course. But it was these resources that they created. And so I was able to direct them, to the Healing Foundation, the incredible resources that they did. And so they incorporated that into the curriculum. They dedicated a garden, to a special garden that commemorates and acknowledges the Indigenous students, but they've got native flowers, and it's a beautiful little sort of seating area for the kids to just hang out, and it's utilized daily. But they also did things like, I spoke about, this school particularly has partnerships with remote communities like Timber Creek, and I was talking about the importance of having a trauma-informed scope, but also the cultural awareness, because for a lot of kids, particularly from that community, English is their 3rd, 4th language. And so if you're getting a kid and you're putting them into boarding school institution structure that we know that historically for our mob has not been, it was nothing about that was great. And we know what that meant for our mob. So I asked those questions, what kind of safety measures do you have to keep these kids safe? Because if we look at the higher suicide rates in those communities, the higher substance abuse rates, there's so many barriers for these kids to just be able to thrive and survive. And if the teachers don't have the capacity to look at the underlying issues, then they are going to be labeled as those naughty kids, or those naughty Black kids, and the cycle is just perpetuated, and you end up doing further harm to mob. And anyway, so the outcome of that was terrific, because the teachers received cultural awareness training, which was terrific. They also had an opportunity to bring in an Indigenous, a specific person for an Indigenous role. I do want to note the person that's in that role is not Indigenous. However, they have worked in community, and they've worked in community all around Australia, but they are terrific in that role and have taken care of my kid really well. And in the way that they don't class themselves as an ally, they don't say that word. You know what I mean? They just do it. And I think that's really important for me. But also something else I want to share, AJ, that was really profound is when my grandfather moved from the Torres Straits on my mum's side, he settled in Port Douglas, and there weren't any Torres Strait Islanders there at that point. So we were the first Torres Strait Islander family to settle in Port Douglas. And Mossman was where the council was, and it's about like half an hour drive from Port Douglas. But when my grandfather first moved to the Torres Straits and started establishing his name and community, they asked him to raise the Torres Strait Islander flag in Mossman. And the really special thing is when on this reconciliation journey with the school, they asked my son to raise the Torres Strait Islander flag. And so I've got these two photos, that are so powerful and so profound to me. And after they raised the flag, so for the first time in history, because that was something else that I suggested to them, was that the Union Jack doesn't represent and doesn't speak to the first, to the people that were here first. And so they, for the first time in history, Ballarat, obviously we know the colonial history of Ballarat. It was the first time that hung the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag, and seeing my son raise that was incredible. But after they'd done that, they had a smoking ceremony, and they had this car, and they had the other recommendations was engaging, with the local TOs there, because they wanted me to be able to go down and, essentially run these things for them, or teach them how to incorporate the local country into, to embed that into their school, to community, into school. So I said to them, like, you need to have a yarn to the Wadawurrung mob there. And they did just that. So they've allocated a budget as well for a Wadawurrung elder to come do a welcome to country for all of their major events. They do that within a classroom setting. And just seeing, though, when they did do that smoking ceremony, they had it on a cart and they pushed it throughout the whole school, and it got to the back oval, AJ, and they had all of the non-Indigenous students doing a guard of honour, and all the Indigenous kids, because they were painted up, walking behind this elder. It was in lockdown, so I was watching this through Zoom, and I was bawling my eyes out because it was so powerful and profound. But, everything that my grandfather on my mum's side, but also, my great-grandfather Eddie Mabo for us to have. And so that, for me, and seeing that now, and seeing my son almost going into year 12, but how the school have really wrapped their arms around him, but how safe it's made him feel. I also recall meeting a kid a couple of years ago when I first started helping them, and there was a kid that was didn't want to identify just yet within the school. This person is so proud now, and it's only because the school has been able to provide that safety. And I think that's so important, is when we are talking about reconciliation plans and reconciliation, is not just a stagnant document that just gets cobwebs on it and left somewhere on a SharePoint. It's something that needs to be active, and it needs to kind of evolve with what that looks like as well, and I think it needs to create and include what managing those risks are going to be like, because it's not going to be sunshines and rainbows. So what kind of safety measures do you have in place for the Indigenous, children that, me, essentially, I'm leaving my child there. Like, they see my child more than I do. So I just think it's so important, and it's just been wonderful to see, just to be able to be a part of that, but also know that and feel so confident that my son is being taken care of and is safe that way.
And like, you never finished year 12, and it must be exciting that your son's getting to year 12. And I think that for some of our listeners, they probably don't realize that this is the first generation of First Nations kids that are actually getting to year 12.
Mm. Yeah.
And that, for us, that's a really huge thing in some of our families. So I bet you're proud of your son getting to year 12.
Oh, I'm so proud, AJ. And it's one of those things that's so healing for my inner child, you know, and it goes back and it is healing for my ancestral lineage as well. But recently at his Dart house, like his boarding house dinner, I got a photo of him, and then I looked back on a photo of he and I when we were homeless, and I was, 20. He's 3 years old. Now I'm 35 and he's 17. And it was just a moment where I'm sitting there at this boarding school knowing that, our ancestors didn't get that same opportunity to be attending a school, like a prestigious, institution like that, let alone me choosing to send my son, to an institution like that now. There's so many elements of healing that makes me so proud, but also makes me so grateful, for our ancestors that have paved that way for us, but also makes me just so proud of myself. I think, looking back at that photo of Harley and I when I was homeless, at that time where I was, there was no certainty in my life at that point. And to see him now, it just makes me so, so proud, but also to see that he's been able to go on and do so much that, I wasn't able to achieve at that age, but also some things that I probably won't achieve, like, with his footy career pathway, but also the fact he's been able to, attend world global conferences and be sponsored by some philanthropist and go to Nairobi, Kenya, because of a civil rights piece that he wrote. Like, it is so healing for me, and it just makes me so proud of us. And I think that would be something, if I could offer that to anyone listening, is like, don't allow the circumstances that you're in at the moment to define you, because there is a future version of you cheering you on, and just keep going, because it gets so much better, and it just makes me so proud.
I'm just watching the time, and my final question was, and I think you've just answered it, what would you like people to walk away with from our yarn today? And I think you've just answered that
Yeah.
perfectly. But I want to say thank you very much for hanging with me. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. I'd love to have you back on, and I know people will not want to hear more. So I'm sure there'll be a part 2 with Seau. But my final little question is, if I could give you $1 zillion and a magic wand, right? And you could fix something in any area, including family violence or education, what would you want to do?
Um, I think I'd do everything that I can to keep our kids at home where they belong, because our kids belong with us. So, yeah.
I think
I
that's
feel,
beautiful.
yeah. And that it's such a bittersweet feeling being a parent, as a descendant of a stolen generations, family member, the privilege and that I get to raise my children is such an honor, and not one that I take lightly. So I think, yeah, that's what I would do. Everything that I can to keep our babies at home where they belong.
Thanks, Seau. I love you so much. You're a great mum. You're a great community worker. I love everything that you do. Thank you very much for joining us today. So, guys, I'll see you guys at the next podcast. And thanks, Seau, for joining us.